Wait till everyone has. Perfect. Hello, everyone. Thank you all so much for coming. Today, we will be thinking globally and enacting policies locally. So, a little bit about what we'll be doing today. Intro, we'll do some community agreements, a little bit of the style of the lecture. We'll have handbooks so everyone can take notes on how they want to lead in the legislature. We'll do a land acknowledgement, human rights call to action, my introduction, a little bit about me. What is policy, solutions? We'll be talking about coalitions, lobbying, policy, pitching, working with elected officials, pillars of government, budget troubles, gaining momentum, social media types of changes, and close out. But will be super interactive, so just raise your hand at any point and share out. So we welcome you in any capacity as you are. Don't feel the need to change. The world can change its heart. So thank you all for coming and just being your authentic selves. So community agreements, this is kind of just the stuff we'll be discussing in this room. When we share, just be respectful, turn that me into a we, work together, take and make space, talk a little, listen a little, and just be a good human. So this will be super collaborative. We will learn, share, and take idea breaks. So when I say idea breaks, both people on the live stream and in person can just raise their hand and announce kind of what or chat if you're on the live stream, your thoughts, your ideas on policies, and any questions you may have. Just raise your hand at any time if you have a point to share, if you want to add your viewpoint, if you have a question, super casual. So this is the Lead in the Legislator handbooks. This is an interactive note guide, so you can figure out how you want to lead in policies, and then we'll go over it at the end. So if you want to, it's a Google Doc. You don't have to write in it. It's just there as a resource for you, so you can scan it. And if you're online, you can also scan it as well and just take notes kind of as we're going through it. So I'll give everyone a minute, and then once I see some thumbs up, if everyone has accessed it. Okay, perfect. So we acknowledge and respect the ancestral homelands. Where UCLA stand is the land of the Tongva, who were a Native American tribe who were forcibly displaced and colonized. So we recognize that we stand on their land and hope to bring the virtues of peace, justice, and also accountability for the actions that definitely look up if you know what native land you are on, just to know and find out and learn more about the tribe and understand where you live. So first off, a human rights call to action. We also recognize the ongoing genocide and ethnic cleansing in Congo, Palestine, and Sudan. These are some of my favorite journalists and organizations doing work on the ground. So I highly recommend to give them a follow just to keep tabs on that. And also there are some calls to action. If you haven't already, definitely make sure to call your representatives and urge them to call for a ceasefire. If you're here in the United States, call your senator, Congress people. If you're not here in the United States, call your nearest representative as well. So those are some journalists totally recommend. So a little bit about me. If y'all heard my keynote speech earlier, I do a lot of nonprofit work. I'm also an activist. So yeah, super excited to be here. And I'll be handing out my contact information later. And that's my Instagram handle. So would love to connect. Feel free to connect with me, shoot me a DM. Always here as a resource or just to have fun or whatever you're interested in. Super interested to hear your passions. So what is public policy? This can be a system of laws, measures, courses of action. This can also be funding. This can also be existing programming. So pretty broad. We'll be focusing mainly on policy and laws and existing funding today and how you can write and lobby for them. So from a global viewpoint, just because we will be talking about the SDGs, here are the SDGs if you don't already know them, they're also up there. So I'll be giving some specific examples on policy on the SDGs and how you can implement that in your communities, whether that be county, city, state, or national level. So first up is identifying a problem. Figure out what policy is there and why it's not working. If there's no policy, that's a good thing to note when you start off. Let's say you're working on climate justice. If there's nothing regulating a school's CO2 emissions, write that down and note that there's nothing there. Seek feedback. So go on the ground. We've heard all throughout today that lived experience in frontline communities mean everything. When formulating policy, you need to talk to people who are affected by it. So gather input. Go meet people, get their opinion, ask them if it's a program that's not working, ask them what they need in programming, and really just foster like kind of a town hall environment where everyone just speaks up and shares their interests and like what's impacting that issue. Um, Access, resource allocation, and effectiveness. What resources are already there? So on the, let's say, violence, what resources are already there for domestic violence survivors? I'll give the example of that, of an SDG. And then why are they not working? So contact those programs, contact those people served by those programs, and realize what's going on. Is the programming like not getting funding? And then also look at, with the policy, what consequences have come, if anything has happened from the policy, if there's been an economic impact, if there is previous legislative precedent, or if there's no legislative precedent or policy, why, what are the unintended consequences of that? Also look for disparities. If there's a program that's only serving domestic violence survivors that tend to be a certain race or income level, definitely look for data and write that down, and then find out where we can make programming more inclusive or policies more inclusive. Next steps, evaluate the issues closely. So again, frontline communities, make sure to bring them to the table when you're formulating a policy. Research the who, what, and where, and why, and how. So those are 3 questions, not 3 questions, those are 5. I can do math, I promise you. So research those 5 questions, take notes, and make that your main outline for data. Research into previous policies or laws, whether that be at, like, let's say on the national level, research what has been done, what has been passed. If it hasn't been passed, where has it stopped in the legislature, and where has it stopped in policies, and why has it stopped? Look into initiatives and ideas. If there's an org doing something that would be amazing for programming, look into that, do research, add that to your data, talk to those people with the organization. What ideas are out there? So what has been tried, and why hasn't it been successful, or how has it been successful if it has? So definitely look at ideas and initiatives. Let's say you have an idea to have domestic violence education programs at K through 12 schools. Look at schools that have implemented that, or look at community organizations that have implemented something similar. Definitely see how implementation has worked on local levels. Here in California, we have an arts education fund called Prop 28. Many of us thought it would be successful, but on the local level, money just isn't trickling down. So that's an example of just figuring out how it's implemented, because it may not be the policy, it may just be the fact that they need more follow-up. Look at which sector of government oversees accountability. This is huge because certain departments, like for instance, Prop 28, went through CDE, which is the California Department of Education. So make sure that you're in touch with those departments once a policy is passed, or before it's even passed, just to make sure that this would be something that would be effective. Also, make sure that if a different policy has been introduced, that somewhat aligns, also noting that as well. And we'll take an idea break. What is a policy solution to one of the SDGs? And what would be one of the steps? And anyone can share, raise your hand, or in the chat, I can read some out. What is a policy solution to one of the sustainable development goals? Like, what's an idea to come up with a solution? Like, I'll give the example of climate change. What's one of the ideas and steps you should come up with during formulation of that policy idea?
Do you mind going back to the SDGs?
Yeah, absolutely. Let me go back. Oh. So, like, what's an idea you have, like, let's say with peace and justice, for a step that would be a piece of a process for policy? And this one's a hard one. If no one has any answers, I can give some examples.
Peace and justice, kind of like educating.
Peace and justice, like the criminal justice system, but also like global peace. So, for instance, one idea for a policy, like a ceasefire resolution, that's a policy that goes through Congress and Senate.
Or let's say the resolution against the tortures in the prisons. That could be a piece of
Yeah. Yep.
Too, right? So we can make a research, like gather data about the cases of how often it was happening, or maybe if we're talking about a certain country or a region from that region, and figure out what prisons specifically were like since I'm not from here, I don't really know prisons are controlled by the local
State
state
and federal.
government, right?
State and government.
Both state
Yeah,
and
right.
government. So maybe we can make like a document forcing the prison like governance to promote, like to keep these posters, for example. That's the most basic step, right? To keep these posters like that we are striving for peace, that we're not torturing anyone, and if a person is in a prison doesn't mean that we can be unrightful towards that person. Second would be to make like you know how like regular profit companies, they have audit process every year. Something similar to prison, which like let's say lawyers, associational communities can come once a year, or maybe if requires twice a year. They'll be making like analysis of how are they coping to follow these rules and policies. But like I think the best way to do this would be getting feedback from prisoners, but since it's very specific place, it's a prison. Those prisoners could be like biased towards the governance of the prison, and they might not be totally honest, and that is something like requires like thinking and like considering what can we do.
Right. I really like how you mentioned the reporting, because that's one thing that isn't really done in our prison system, or that isn't transparent. And that's definitely one of the main steps of policy, is finding out and just even running an audit. I saw a hand over here. Right. Yes. Yeah, that's a great solution, because that's definitely one thing we need to focus on. And also, back to research, formulating that in the first step of policy. Okay, so coalition building. When you're formulating an idea or you're working towards a sustainable development goal, you need to gather different people, different organizations, aka coalitions. So definitely outreach to certain organizations and explain the goal. Explain why you need them. So, for instance, if you are working on a climate justice policy, reach out to a climate justice org and explain, I need your feedback because, or I need this X, Y, and Z. Be very clear. Gather feedback from everyone, have regular conversations. So once you have a group of maybe 15 different organizations or students, have conversations regularly as you're formulating this and as you start to introduce it in the legislature. Have a database. I keep a list of like 20 organizations when I'm working on policy that would be great to reach out to, and make sure they're hitting on like every intersection of the issue. So on climate justice, that impacts animals. So have animal welfare groups involved. That also impacts people. So have groups that focus on the people impact of climate justice with extreme heat, extreme flooding, and stuff like that. Ask for representatives of people they serve to prevent disconnect. So make sure that when you have someone coming from the org, make sure that they can either speak directly to these issues, but also include someone who's being served from the organization. So, on the example of domestic violence, if you're reaching out to a domestic violence resource center, make sure that there is someone there who has experienced that themselves, who is comfortable sharing their story. Again, no, we don't want disconnect, and especially in policies, that leads to very ineffective policymaking. Set expectations on what you need from organizations. So, if you need letters of support, if you need quotes, make sure you're very clear with that. Include them in each step of the way. So we'll go further on in the presentation about what the processes are like to implement policies. Just make sure you're keeping them in the loop through everything, because you're going to need them and they're going to need you. Ask about capacity and be flexible. Y'all know that nonprofits are really hard to run. It's really hard to contact people. So just make sure that you know their capacity and you also know their flexibility. Another thing is be prepared for office politics, hierarchy, gatekeeping, competition, nonprofit clutter, long response time, short staff. This is all things that happens on the regular, along with funding. And just give them more grace because everyone's trying their best, even though it's really hard to run a nonprofit. And just be aware that this can happen and this will happen throughout as you're gathering different organizations. The other thing is explain tit for tat why they should be involved. Say your organization could benefit because you're shaping policy or something along those lines, because they're going to ask what is in it for our organization. Have like shorter and longer ends of capacity. So a lower end is like you're listing their organization as someone that supports the policy, reposting social media, using the logo. Higher end could be quotes, anecdotes, media, feedback, meeting attendance, and list some things like this and see kind of what they're open to and what they have capacity for. Again, nonprofits are super hard. There's hierarchy, there's all of this components to it. So just make sure that you're giving options. Allow flexibility, definitely highlight the deadlines, but keep it open to change for instance, what their capacity can look like. I recommend that if you have no response after 5 days, you follow up. Initial outreach, I also recommend 3 times. So that means if you are reaching out to an organization, maybe reach out like 3 times if you don't hear back. And then after that, you can kind of give up. But that I would recommend 3 times and a little bit spread out like 5 days or a week, just to make sure it's getting to the right person. Email doesn't work. Try a different approach. Social media DMs, phone call, drop in, mail. Honestly, how I found some of my organizations, for All Access Arts, how I found some partners was literally social media DMs. You would just never know that some people don't check their email or you're reaching the wrong person. So the other thing is also make sure that you're reaching out to a few organizations. When you're reaching out to the organizations, to a few contacts at the organization, just to make sure you're finding the right person. Sometimes people have left, so always just keep many people in the loop. Idea break. What is one way you can coalition build? And what's another idea? Like, you can repeat if I've listed it here, but if you have an idea on how you can coalition build. And anyone can raise their hand and just share.
Yeah, you want collaboration. Like looking for people with the same ideas, thinking, same approach, same vision, and you just collaborate there. You just reach out.
Right. Yeah, it can be super casual. And honestly, a lot of great conversation and progress can come out of just a casual conversation.
When you don't reach out outside of that bubble, there tends to be that limit that you have yourself in. The important part of coalition is that diversity is actually a conversation. Because if you do not have diverse perspectives, you are unable to complete the community goal. Because the point of community is to understand, to empathize, and work together. I think Penelope has showed crazy amounts of commitment throughout her nonprofits to that coalition build is not just who you speak to, but empowering others to speak out no matter where.
Thank you so much. And Allison leads a coalition, so she's kind of an expert on this. And I have learned a lot from her. So definitely love what you said about diversity, equity, and inclusion. So important. Any more ideas before we move on? Okay. Lobbying. So this is one way to support policies. This is you are supporting and forming legislation. You're not writing it. So it can be an idea that's already formed. It could be, for instance, Martin, I'm putting you on the spot here. Martin's working on a bill and he wants support. So people support that bill and different groups support that bill as well. This is definitely best on the national level or on the national level, shaping international policies. It's super hard to write policy on the national level as a citizen. It's mostly controlled by private interests. And it's a really difficult, really difficult process, and also really hard to have a great end result that gets passed. So here it's best to lobby, in my opinion. So you're urging a legislative body to vote yes or no. This can be in the forms of meetings, press conferences, letters, videos, and even phone calls. You can even like record videos and say vote yes on blank. It can be as creative as you want it to be. You can use poems. This is where like activism can come and intersect with lobbying. It can be groups of citizens. For instance, if it's a bill on like educational equity, get a group of students to do a lobby day. So definitely really creative ways you can just urge them to vote yes. Does anyone have any ideas on one way you could lobby?
To implement a policy.
Um,
Well, I'm from Cameroon, and sometimes it gets really hard. So sometimes what we use is push SMSs, which sort of, because of course not everybody's on the smartphone. So how you can lobby for certain information, sometimes what we do is we go to the telecom companies, the like private institutions, they have, large national database. So we're sure that if we send an SMS, say on a particular topic or a subject or an initiative that's coming up and we need people to sort of buy in, we'll just do like a short message, really nicely crafted, give it out to, the telecom agency, and then they'll push SMS to everybody. So they'll sort of receive the message on time, everybody that at least we're sure, even if you're not on the internet, at least you're gonna receive that, that information and you make an informed decision based on what we share. That SMS.
Yeah, that's really cool. I've actually never heard of that in my lobbying work, and that is something I feel like we should definitely try because it sounds much more effective and much easier to organize and get more volunteers. So thank you so much for sharing. Any other ideas? Okay, moving on to writing policies. This is where you're finding an issue, coming up with an approach, a solution, getting opposition and support. Not getting opposition, obviously, but listing opposition and finding your opposition. Finding out which committee or in which sectors of government it's going to go through. Getting legal language, and also including research, quotes, lived experience, media, facts, and data. So when you're coming up with an issue, you're addressing an issue. So let's say domestic violence, you're coming up with a policy idea, you're formulating that, you're writing that policy idea, which means it is your idea versus lobbying where you're supporting someone else's idea. You search for support in coalition building, but you also identify who would be most likely to oppose it. So you got to make sure that there's not any major stakeholder organizations that are going to oppose it as you pitch it to your legislator. You also have to find with committee that it aligns best with. That is where you're trying to figure out how it's going to get onto the floor of whatever form of government you have in your country or state. So let's say if it's an environmental bill, most likely go to a climate committee, and that climate committee could vote yes or no on it. But sometimes people aren't as open to that in certain committees. So just kind of identifying that because it can show how hard it will be to pass. This is kind of what a legislative proposal request form, this is from one of the policies I was working on. So essentially you summarize your idea, you list the problem, research, statistics, then you come up with a solution. You also list legislative precedent, which is something that is similar. So what has been done on the issue or also what has been done that's similar to your approach. So for instance, this organization, this piece of policy I have has a legislative precedent that just touches on the approach, not necessarily the issue itself. Estimating costs, this is very important. Do your research, look at legislative precedents, find out how much it's going to cost the government. In times of budget deficit, this can be an automatic no, and this can also be something where it could be easier to pass because it doesn't have a high cost. Organizational support, again, you just list what organizations have already said they're going to commit to it and support it, or which organizations most likely would. List some arguments in support, list organizational opposition, and then also kind of play devil's advocate and find some arguments in opposition, and make sure that you have answers to kind of debunk those and respond back. Then, of course, committee assignment, which is where you add where it will go through. Any questions on this? Yeah.
Do you guys do stakeholder mapping when you're developing your policy?
You definitely do. That's in the feedback process. So when you're writing a policy, you definitely talk to the group who it's impacting. So that would kind of be in the beginning, like with the solution, stakeholder would be part of that, like before you formulate the solution, because you can have an idea, but it could not work, for instance. So talking to those groups before you make it official, your solution that you're proposing.
So, I'm from the country where our government is forced to run the regulatory impact analysis before passing the law or like any policy. And that is required only for laws, let's say for taxes or for new, let's say, financial policies, because the government's kind of testing waters. They would pass the law. They would gather the data on how it's working for like 6 months, and after that they would give their final answer if they're passing the law, the policy, or not. If we have to like redo that or rewrite the policy. And I was wondering if you guys have like the same areas here on a state level or maybe on just a local level, and if that is somehow implemented, and if there is some like steps to measure the effectiveness of the policy after you guys pass it.
Um, Definitely. So for taxes, that's a different process. Those policies get moved and get lawyers to advise on. So government lawyers will inform like how effective this could be, or how how it would operate and how it would be enforced. For local level enforcement, it can vary. So there's definitely some policies where it's been great on the state level, but certain communities and certain counties and cities haven't had success with that. So sometimes there is enforcement, sometimes there isn't. It sometimes can come down to the county or city level, at least from my experience here in California.
So I'm just asking this because I just want to know better how everything works here in California. So government doesn't have like any assessment measures before passing the law.
They assess it throughout, like when they vote on it. So each lawmaker assesses it themselves in a way, and then the governor obviously has a say, and then citizens as well can make public comment. But it ultimately comes down to the committees that it goes through, and then both. We have a bicameral legislative government here, so both houses making sure the Senate and the Assembly agree. And I think it's like a majority vote, and then some are 2/3 of a vote. So yeah, those are kind of it kind of does have analysis in that way. And then from the legal standpoint of like how this would, there's are lawyers who are consulted. Of course. Any other questions? Okay, moving on. So when you're pitching your policy idea to a government official, what you're going to be doing is you're going to tailor it to the lawmaker. So if you're meeting with someone who tends to be more conservative, you are going to maybe use different language, or maybe talk more about how this would impact the economy. If you are pitching, highly recommend Googling their bios and just Googling their committee assignments and their background and finding out their interests, and then kind of tailoring that to what they're interested in, how your policy idea could help that. Make connections. I highly recommend just making connections with the staffers. You're going to always want to talk to the staff. They're the ones who know what's going on. They tend to have the most resources and also the most say. The other thing is look for like passions in the lawmakers, but also in the staff. So be pretty casual. Whenever we're pitching policy and SAC, we kind of just talk to the staffers. You can make a connection, like if they're a UCLA Bruin, be like, oh, I'm a Bruin too, or something along those lines to make it a bit more personal. Definitely look for people to represent the face of the issue, who are encountering the issue, because that will make an impact. And lawmakers can't really, you can't really argue with lived experience. Look to know a little bit about the lawmaker's background as well. If they have authored previous legislation on that, that could be a potential interest. But also, you'd be surprised. One of my bills this year was authored by a Republican who had never shown any interest in gender justice. So you never know. Sometimes they're always interested in just kind of exploring. One other thing I would recommend is having a catchy email subject when you're pitching. So like people-led or youth-led, those are terms they really like to see, or grassroots, because it's so rare. It's mostly corporate interests. So 10 out of 10 recommend have a catchy email subject, and make sure that your messaging is on point. Always ask to speak with the staff. You can talk with the lawmaker, but you're probably going to get it. I have to talk to my staff about it. The staff will know. The staff are trained in policy and in policy implementation even more than the lawmaker. So just off the bat, ask to speak with staff. Reach out to all, even those who you think would never in a million years author policies, because you'd be surprised. I also find that as someone's terming out, if there is term limits, they are interested in taking more of a bolder stance or maybe a different stance on policies. Like this Republican that offered one of my policies, he's terming out, so he may not have as many ties to the party as he's planning to retire, and may be interested in taking more of a passionate stance. Also, if someone's new, that's another opportunity where they may want to take a bold stance on policy. They may want to enter the legislature with having a really bold policy and having something that will make a big change, and also something that's youth led or people led. So you never know. Just reach out to everyone. It doesn't hurt. Understand that it will take time to hear back, and it will take time to set up a meeting with the legislature. So I recommend Googling the legislative seasons and making sure that you're reaching out within that time frame. If not even earlier, I would recommend, because it will take a lot of time and it will take a lot of consideration. Typically, legislators have a legislative slate of policies they want to author. It can be anywhere from 20 to 30 in most states. So just make sure that the earlier you are, the higher chances you will have one of those spots if they are interested. Loop in the scheduler. They're amazing. They're the ones who are going to get you in. Also, make sure that you get those business cards. Follow up with them. LinkedIn message them. LinkedIn, like, connect with them. Stay connected, because even if they say no, that's a connection for next year. There's always another legislative season. There's always another legislative year. They can always support it, and they can always just champion it in different ways as well. If you get a no, that's okay. Don't take it personally. Stay in contact. They can co-author. They can support. They can also lead it and do it next year. So again, it's not reframe the no's to like, I made a connection. That's still a win. If it's not picked up by anyone, that's okay. You planted the seed of change. Keep everything, all the materials you used, all the coalitions, and just use it next year if you want. Also, sometimes this can be impacted because the budget's too tight. So it's always something you can use in the future. So again, reframe that no to like, I did make a change. I planted the seed of change, and I also raised awareness on the issue. It does get people thinking and also generates ideas and puts it on their radar. So that's another thing to think about. Even when you are tirelessly pitching to people, it will make an impact. If it's something on domestic violence and you have a survivor story, that lawmaker could be more inclined to vote yes on certain measures. So just constantly reframe it and think about it from an optimistic standpoint. Let's see. What pillar of government? So this is where you decide where you want to implement your policy. There's the city level, there's a county level, there's a state, and then there's a country. So this could be a city policy. That means it's only implemented in that city. Could be, and it's kind of like it gets easier. It gets easier when you're a city, and then as hard as a country. So kind of like the scale of how difficult it is. I recommend when you're on the national level, that's when you want to start. That's when you want to do lobbying only. County, state, and city, you can always do lobbying. That's always great, but there is more of a chance to write policies. And state policies can be difficult to write. It just depends which state you're in, but you can always lobby, and that makes an incredible impact as well. Let's see. Make sure you're civically educated and engaged, so you know how to write the policies on the city level and the county level and the state level. So do research, take advantage of free tools like Khan Academy, and there's something called iCivics by Sandra Day O'Connor's Institute. So look at resources like that, so you know about the government, you know the lawmakers, and you know how it would get passed. Budget troubles. So when there is a lack of money or a budget deficit, there's many different things you can do. You can always start writing policies that are focused on education. Education, we have, we fund public education. That's an existing bucket of money in a way, to imagine it that way. So those don't tend to take a ton of money. Another thing you can do is law changes. So for instance, it could be something that's just in the Constitution or that's in the laws of California or your state, that says, like, for instance, pride flags are banned or something like that. And then you change, you're still making an impact, right? That's not going to cause a price change. Or for instance, graduation, a lot of like cultural memorabilia that you wear during graduation can be prohibited. So something like that, changing the law that there's a ban on banning wearing a flag to graduation. That's another great policy to implement. So thinking about it from that standpoint. The other thing you can always do is amend it. So if you have a costly policy and you meet with lawyers, you meet with stakeholders, you can always take certain things out of it and kind of water it down, so that it's more easy to be passed or more easy to be picked up. I also recommend socializing existing programs or bringing awareness to an issue. So let's say you want to make an impact on climate justice. You could have a climate justice education week in schools or a climate justice awareness week across the state where you do education and stuff like that. That's something that isn't going to cost a lot but still makes an impact. You can always also do resolutions, which is where they read on the Senate floor or like mark a week as, like, for instance, Climate Justice Week in California. That can be a resolution, which is easier to author. Look into existing funds. So if there are already funders, if there already is certain budgets and certain departments that are getting money. So for instance, like, let's say art education, you could implement a policy where it's like all students should get a music class because there already is funding for that. So definitely look into where their funding is and where it won't be cut. One time versus continuing costs. Look at the fact, if it's something that you fund one time and then it's a policy that stays that way, or if it's something that continually will need money because that is something that will be cut. One-time costs are so much easier to pass when you have a policy that only needs funding once. The other thing you can always do is, if it's expensive, try a different year. Budgets always fluctuate. If you have a good year, go bold on the policies, go bold on the programming. If you have a bad year, focus on education or different things. So idea break. What is one creative way around budget deficits that you can think about that wouldn't require your state or your country to spend that much? Any ideas?
If you don't have money, you just don't have money.
Well, there's things that could cost less than, for instance, like forming a new program, like education, that type of thing. Or there's different things where you could create a program out of existing funding. So there is creative ways around it.
Thinking of two, but I'm not sure.
Yep.
I would say, like, I know some of the people was talked about, like, say if you're trying to get like your focus across, you can always ask, like, if you're out of school or a local school, if you can like host like an event to like try to gain like money. And then sometimes too, you can always, like, if you are at a school, like they said in the other panel, you can ask the school for funding as well, but or like just maybe even like try to do it at like a park or something to try to, like, fundraise to get money.
Yeah, universities can definitely, if there's, for instance, if it's research, universities could be interested in implementing or helping with that policy. So that's a great idea. Any other thoughts? Oh, go ahead.
So one thing that I think has sort of also worked with how I run social like purposeful initiatives, you look for a partner that's sort of like, so you can do like 5 different partners and they have different roles that they sort of play on the project. So probably somebody you're just asking them initially for space. Another person you're probably just asking them, if let's say if it's like a something that requires like an event that's supposed to host people and you need space, you kind of look for a partner for space, you kind of look for a partner that's going to provide, say, food or whatever, and then so you sort of find people who are, that's their objective, that's what they offer as a service, and you bring them on board to just provide that and it kind of reduces the budget lines to what's really important.
That's perfect. That actually reminds me of something. For instance, if you're trying to enforce a policy where there's education on anti-vaping or something, there are organizations that do that and will do that for free. So make it a policy where it's community partnerships. So it's a great idea, looking into who is already offering it and would be willing to, and then just make it kind of like a mandate. Any other ideas?
Gardens, I was thinking in education, like building edible gardens at school, like making it a mandatory part of the curriculum. I mean, kids eat in the cafeteria. I'm sure there's a budget for that.
Right.
Like tie it together and it will promote nutrition, healthy eating. Become a steward for the environment. But I think it will be more effective as part of the curriculum if it comes like from the Department of Education, the state that runs the education is supposed to having a grassroots organization come in and presenting the project because the policies and what have you might stop the organization from carrying on with the project. But if it's implemented within the school curriculum and standards, it might be easier to continue with that initiative, I suppose.
Right. And like you could have a partnership with a climate justice organization because that's going to help CO2 emissions, or with a climate justice fund. So looking at all those intersectionalities and kind of bringing it together.
It's really critical, especially in environments. You're going to see for ethnic studies that recently went past the California curriculum is a big, big especially.
And partnerships are everything. So just looking into intersectionalities, because there are a lot of organizations or philanthropic different nonprofits that can do work and that can do it for free, and then just have it be a partnership. Okay, movement. This is where you're creating movement and making sure that your policy is getting a lot of attention. So you can reach out to media. That's one of my personal favorites because people see it, they can see how they can get involved and join the movement, and also how they can make an impact. It also brings awareness to your issue. You can have like high-level endorsers. So for instance, if you're working on a policy on gender justice, maybe have a celebrity or someone who's really passionate, or an activist with a high following. That will really get people excited. That will also get people supporting it. So for instance, if you're working on a peace policy, you could get an actress or someone who's working with Save the Children or something along those lines. So looking at people who have that passion and can use their platform for change. So you can start even like on the local level. Like for instance, one of the bills I'm working on is Title IX. Title IX impacts sports. So getting like local athletes to participate and to spread the word, or like an NBA player. So it doesn't have to be a celebrity. It just can be anyone. And that will really get lawmakers excited. And this is both for lobbying and writing policies. The other thing you can do is with media outreach, do a lot of social media outreach, bring art and activism, the intersection of it together. You can also do like poetry or posters or certain things like that where it really gets people excited. The other thing you can do is social media. So this kind of goes with media outreach as well, but have graphics, have hashtags, have video, have art, even create a toolkit of resources and put it on like a Google Drive and ask partners to repost. And different social media posts could even be like interviews or fun little TikToks. It can be as creative as you want it to be. And movement can also be as creative as you want it to be. Does anyone have any creative ideas for like activism and just the movement? We'll do a share out.
Conferences, panels.
Yes, that's perfect. Yes. Love that. Any other ideas? Interviews with social media, interviews. That's perfect. Anyone else have any cool social media posts? It can even, what? I love that. That's perfect. Any other ideas? Can even be like a silly TikTok dance.
I don't know if this helps, but like the threads on Twitter.
Right. Yeah. Having like a cool thread or something where people can repost it, that definitely generates a movement and gets lots of visibility.
Incentives like food. Come to this
Right.
event and we have food.
Incentives. I also think having something like we'll give you a follow or something along those lines, being very creative, and especially if you're reaching out to the younger generation. We love our social media. Media. So how to get media. You can contact local TV stations, you can contact print, you can contact magazines. So what you're going to do is you're going to want to say what your end goal is. So for instance, if you're working on policy, you're going to say, I want to get attention on this gun violence piece of legislation that's going to help prevent gun violence, that's going to X, Y, and Z. So explain the policy, why you want attention on it, and also include anecdotes. If they need someone to appear on TV, that can be you. That could also be, if you're not comfortable with that, or if you'd rather give the opportunity to someone else, someone who has lived experience or a partner organization. And again, include like quotes, anecdotes, photos, and just reach out. Have, like I said, for staff, have a really engaging and kind of like a hook of a headline or an email subject to really get them interested and draw attention to it. Any idea on like one thing you would do if you were reaching out to media? Yeah.
So I don't know how it works here, but media in my country, especially for questions around policy and the rest, your buy-in if it's coming from a government agency and posted. But when it's coming from, say, a local coalition or organization, they sort of charge you a significant amount to put that information out there. So how do you get to because I've struggled with that, especially with media relations, is how do you get the media to buy into your idea and see the importance of actually communicating on that? Because they do live off from the fees that you pay for them to publish certain information. So how do you get them to sort of buy in and share the information that you want them to share without necessarily paying a large money?
Yeah, you can mention that you have a large coalition. So also mention that their media is going to get more exposure. So kind of the tit for tat. Another thing you can do is mention that this is people led or that this is youth led, something that's very unique because people led and youth led action and people led and youth led policies are rare. So that will attract their attention. Maybe highlight also creative ways you've gone around it. So, for instance, if it's clean water, if a school did like a banquet or something for it, just mention really creative ways. So make it very unique. And you'll be surprised because it does get a lot of attention. And I was shocked when I first reached out for media on my policy. I'm like, no one will ever do this. But the fact that it was youth led or people led or citizen action really attracted news stations, even though it may not, you think about it like, how will this get profit? And then again, reminding them that you have a large coalition. And one thing back to like getting movement on it, if you have art or if you have a celebrity endorsing it, that's going to be interesting to them as well. So those are some things I would recommend. Any other questions? Any other ideas on how to get media as well?
I would say like maybe try to look for like an outlet or like conceptuals that aligns with the same goals that you have. But if you're trying for like environmental policy is fine, like environmental specialist outlet or an outlet that focuses around that because not only will they for sure say yes because they love that and they align with the goals, but they might have connections to other people and other organizations that are also fighting for the same thing. So it's like you could choose work with one stone, you not only get media release or media attention, but we also get connections from professionals themselves.
Right. I really like that. And also, if you have a following on social media or something along those lines, mentioning, kind of taking it back to you. Yep.
I think also maybe just like trying to reach out first to smaller or independent.
That's a great way. That's what I've done is like kind of working your way up and saying, and then when you're reaching out for media again, you can be like, it's been featured in blank or it's been featured in blank. And even if it's like one of their competitors, like that's like, they're going to want to get you for your media. So working your way up, let's say you're once you get one media, that can help get more. It can also encourage different media stations to reach out and tell the story. And one thing I also recommend is having different talking points for different times you talk to the media to make sure it's not repetitive, but also to make sure you're highlighting every single element of your policy. So if you're saying something like, let's say my idea about domestic violence education, you can talk to media once and share like a survivor standpoint. And then the second standpoint, you could share like a teacher standpoint. So making it a little bit different each time. That way it does connect the reader. And that way it does when you're showing, having kind of your portfolio of media you've attracted for your bill or for legislation, you can show how different it is and how interesting it is and how many intersections it has.
I was gonna say radio shows or talks because it already happened. This is a lived experience. I came back last year, 2 years ago, from a humanitarian mission. I was away for 6 months. Came back. Not even my family said congratulations or anything, but or my friends. It's because I was following this independent media and activists. The charity contacted me. We want to do an interview on your work, what you have done, because I think it's powerful and important for LA youth to know, like, there's more beyond Los Angeles and what have you. So I went, and I felt very honored, like, just to be there. It wasn't a big radio station, but knowing, like, this sir, like, is watching me and wants to go speak at his radio station. For me, that was, like, amazing. I felt like a celebrity, but the story is, like, months down the line, people reach out through social media. Say, oh, we heard your story, very, very powerful. And I was, well, nobody's going to hear what I have to say. But yeah, I got those compliments along the years. Oh yeah, we heard your story. Yeah, it was very nice. I think it worked out. So.
That's amazing. One other thing I would recommend is podcasts as well. And different, even if it's like media can even be on someone's social media or going live. There's nothing too small when you're making an impact. And again, it builds up your portfolio. You can even reach out to like student journalists. That's a great way, especially if it's impacting students and impacting young people. Reach out and mention that you're interested in hearing more about their policy.
Sorry, I'm just looking for something.
Okay. All good. What are you looking for? I can keep an eye on it. Okay, I'll keep an eye on it. If I find it, I'll let you know. So next up, share an idea of a type of policy change. So we've spoken a lot about like programming and different things. What ideas do you guys have? And there's no dumb ideas. So just full on share out. It can be whatever idea you have. And it can be, I can bring up the SDGs if you guys want to do it based on that to kind of get some inspiration. Oh, yep.
I've really been thinking about the disparity between, I don't know how, but I think, okay, let me rephrase that. There is subventions on the cost of condoms for, sorry if you're in my, but for the cost of, like condoms as a form of, child control, birth control rather. And, I've heard a lot of recent conversation on, what are we doing even in terms like providing, reducing also the cost of sanitary pads. Because, again, if I go through the supermarkets, I'm looking at the cost of a sanitary pad box. That's a lot. And that's what every girl is gonna have to sort of go through. And that's like a huge amount that they're gonna have to pay for the rest of their lives. And then their bill to reduce the cost of condom is really that's like a small amount. So I've been thinking, what can we really do to sort of advocate for, either subsidies or reduction of the cost of, sanitary pads, because every girl is gonna have to sort of go through that. And why I'm saying that again is because in America it's obvious people get birth control pills and all of that, but in Africa it's a whole conversation on what's that birth control going to do to my body and my system. So we're not even in that space. So every girl is actually using a pad. And if the price is really that high, then there are tons of girls who are sort of like out of school for a period because they can't afford that. So I really feel like there's a lot that we can do just to advocate for the cost of, just that to be smooth down.
It's an interesting. Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna
Never thought about
say,
stuff like that.
yeah, I'm gonna put both of my friends on the spot because they're both working on policies on this. So, Martin, can you share a little bit about the policy you're working on for condoms in California?
So I am working with Senator Wendy Barr of California.
Come up here, Martin. Just come up here. No, it's a town hall. You too, Allison. This was too great. I just need it. Yeah.
Okay. So, can you hear me? Okay. Okay. Basically, working with Senator Menjivar from California, we decided to introduce this piece of legislation that would make condoms in high schools free of cost for those who are from marginalized communities, specifically the Central Valley, because we know that the Central Valley is very underfunded and under-resourced. So we want to make sure that people have access to the basic needs that to be able to protect themselves and their basic health. But we have partnered with a lot of organizations out there. I know like teensource.org, we have a CAP project, the Condom Access Project, where we give out if someone goes on our website and they're like, oh, put your address, we'll find you the nearest clinic that provides free resources. Or if you have if you want us, we will also mail them specifically to your house. But I know some people may not want them at their house because of their parents or just their guardian in that case. So we do have partnerships with organizations that provide them for free at no cost, no questions asked. But we can also mail them specifically to you. And Teen Source isn't the only project that's been doing that. There's many programs out there. I know Sisterhood is one of them that provides free menstrual products to anyone, no questions asked. I don't know if Allison, you want to talk about?
Allison, do you want to talk about SB 953 and AB 1810?
Yeah, well, hi guys. My name is Allison. I'm a junior at Rowan High School. And one of the amazing policies we were able to write this year is called AB 1810, which is wrote by Assemblymember Brian and Bonta. It's amazing because we're trying to challenge narratives and embrace diversity, especially in prisons. So this bill would require menstrual products readily available for women in prisons and all menstruators in prisons. So this is LGBTQ plus priority caucus bill, and we're so excited to be presenting this because it is insane how these menstrual products are not readily available, because having menstruators ask for them creates a power dynamic, especially with their police guards, and we want to stop this and embrace women for their rights. And yeah, that's an exciting bill we're working on.
Also need to share SB 953.
Oh yeah, SB 953 is the second bill we also wrote, which would require the Department of Healthcare Services to require menstrual products under the scheduled benefits of Medi-Cal. Unfortunately, that did die in one of the committees, but we are excited to present that again next year probably. But yeah, those are our two bills. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so those are some really cool ideas to impact that issue. Another thing is the pink tax, which is period products have a higher tax and are taxed, where if you think about it, that if those were products that impacted men, that probably wouldn't be the case. So that's another thing to look into in your country is there a pink tax? And also, I believe period products, I may be wrong, Allison, you know more on this than me, are free in schools in California. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I think it's not enforced, but it's highly recommended. So something like that. Again, that's really expensive. Another thing you could do is like asking for community partnerships, like for instance, Girl Up or United Nations or UNICEF, to come in and talk to the girls about their periods and provide resources and provide tampons, because periods are still highly stigmatized. So that's something that could be less costly. I saw a hand there.
I feel like there should be like a policy or something where like you know how we have like our at jobs like designated sick time. I feel like I'm sorry, but women should get maybe a little bit more sick time because like at the end of the day, like we should not be having to be like dying and having to work. I feel like that's something that needs to change as well. We need an extra 2 or 3 days at least out of the month to be able to do that.
100%. And women, we birth the entire population. So if that's an incredible piece of policy. I totally think that should be something that you should pitch to your legislator, because that's very doable. That should be a labor requirement. And if you think about it, periods impact each woman and each menstruating individual differently. If you have endometriosis, that's extremely painful, and periods can be extremely painful. So 100%, you totally need to talk to me afterwards, and we'll find your legislator and how you can ask for that.
Educate someone about those issues if they don't know them.
Right.
Should we do a simulation, a test, so we can experience cramps and all that?
Yeah.
Just put on the-
Oh my goodness.
It sounds daunting, like,
Right.
mind-boggling. Okay, how do you persuade the whole population to give you sick time when you have those issues or whatever, without offending or saying, wait, why they go off and not me? Like, I have cramps too, I should have the day.
And again, you can't argue with lived experiences. So if you're showing up saying, listen, periods hurt, someone can't sit there and be like, they don't. Like, you can't argue with that. So I think that's a great idea. And we'll connect because I totally think you should pitch that.
Well, also talking about the period situation, I'm from Mexico and I'm really familiar with the policy making. There was one actually that was called dignity of menstruation, but like in Mexico we have institutions of health and they actually give out free condoms, but like nothing about menstruation like pads or tampons, like they're really expensive because of the big tax. And in this policy, it was like absurd because they gave you like 3 pads for a month, and not like for every girl. It was like really crazy. So it is supposed that they give you now like menstrual cups. So I actually was surprised when I went into the bathrooms that you have like pads and tampons. I think that should be reinforced and put in every country because it's not my fault to be a woman and to like menstruate every time of the month. So I think that is a really important principle. And also like in some organizations that I'm in Mexico, we do like donations for the migrant women that pass through the country and collect all of the menstrual like pads and tampons for them. So I think that is actually really important.
That would be amazing. And you're at a really critical time in your country where you are going to elect a first female president. So, what better time to talk about menstruation? I mean, you should totally bring that up. And that should totally be something they're even talking about when running on. And one thing when Allison and Martin have done their work with economic justice is that it is a human right not to bleed through your pants. There is dignity and there is security in knowing that you can go to school, especially in different countries and also even here. Like, no one should be skipping work or school because they literally are going to bleed through their pants. So, taking it from like a human rights perspective as well would be something great to bring up.
Maybe it could be a female.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if you're going back to policy change as well, a lot of it has to do with education, like Seth said. I know, like, I had to do like the regular public school sex education, but they kind of brushed over a lot of stuff. Like they say, like, oh, periods happen. They don't really explain like what it is, why it's so hard for women that time of the month. So men typically, like, obviously not all men, but a lot of them don't care. They kind of hear that and they're like, oh, that's not my problem. So they aren't really as inclined, if you bring it to like a male legislator, they aren't as inclined to do something about it. So I think that also just increasing that awareness and changing the education that is brought to children in public schools is really important as well.
I love that. And also one thing in California, and I'm pretty sure across the United States, is periods are only taught to girls, but they're not taught to boys. And people are like, well, boys don't get periods. Well, just because an issue doesn't impact you doesn't mean it's not an issue. You should still know about that. And I think it's really ignorant that we're not teaching boys about periods. So I think that's a great idea.
It's forbidden to teach about sexual education in high schools, in elementary schools. So how do we change that policy?
Right. I think it's fifth grade. I'm not totally aware of the policy, but I do think it is something that isn't talked about. I think it's fifth grade. You're required to talk about periods. I don't know. Yep.
Yeah, so I want to echo your sentiments. So in my professional classes, so I work for LA County Health, and I'm part of a program where we partner with Planned Parenthood for the mental health to provide comprehensive sex ed in classes. But like currently, I'm so sorry, this is in California, but like it's mandated that sex ed is taught to everyone in the teachers who are teaching here are still uncomfortable because of the stigma. So me and my team, we go to classrooms and we provide like, okay, they have people menstruate because we don't try to say, oh, it's girls, it's women, because we try to be inclusive in our language, but people who menstruate, they go through these symptoms, training sorry, I've had so much coffee.
Don't worry about it. Same here.
But like normalizing the conversation for across genders, reducing that stigma. So there is a movement right now. There's a small movement in LA County that hopefully it spreads around. So I'm really glad that these conversations are happening in a form like this.
Yeah, and that's incredible. And that's another policy. Like, for instance, if teachers are uncomfortable teaching about periods, why not have organizations like Planned Parenthood that may have the capacity to do that? And again, that partnership and that intersectionality where someone else can do it. And they may have the funding to do that as well. Any other policy changes or just ideas? It can be anything. It doesn't have to be on the topic of periods, anything. Martin?
I think this is touching back to what you said about like graduation regalia and just I think I want to touch about like free speech. I know recently the USC librarian was prohibited from doing her speech due to her mentioning about Palestine. And I possibly like maybe a question would be like allowing like free speech in like educational spaces because they're places that are meant for learning and even if the topic that you're learning about is rough and it's supposed to be rough for us to learn about because we don't really want to be shitted from the actual world and what's actually happening around us. So that could be a policy change that could happen in like the next few years.
Right. I love that idea. I actually think you should totally pitch that. And if you don't talk about things, how are you going to know? Like, if you don't talk about things, things get worse, in my opinion. If you're not having those conversations, how are we supposed to have a peaceful world where we're communicating with each other if it's like hush, hush? We're not talking about Palestine. We're not talking about world events. So I love that idea. Any other policy ideas? Nothing is a dumb policy idea.
So, the other day I was talking about how in Cameroon I do teach on women's rights, and it struck me that when I did read what the laws were, actually as a woman in Cameroon, you cannot own property until you're 45. I did not know that because we were teaching on women's rights and we are speaking about the right to own property. Not that you cannot own it, but before the age of 45 as an independent person to own that property, you have to co-sign either with your husband or a parent or whoever is older to sort of sign that land title document or that property ownership document. And I was talking to girls and I'm like, you have the right to own property. And then somebody actually raised that, actually I can't own property by myself until I'm 45. And it got me thinking, that, oh my God, what are we actually doing? Because technically, before you get to that age as a woman, you're most likely already, probably if you started a family, your focus and your priorities would sort of shift. And so you're not at 45 actually thinking of owning property or actually buying a home or any, because now your income is going towards your kids, it's going towards their tuition. So technically there's a large amount of women in my country who are not going to actually own any property. Like that's what's gonna really happen. And I'm looking towards, sort of changing or at least driving the conversation so people can actually get aware that they don't need to co-sign with either a spouse to actually own property and buy property in their name because that's really it's really an issue. And what that actually means, especially for us as women, is that when you go to the bank to take a loan, for instance, if you want a loan, they ask for collateral or something to prove. So what do you give in this case? Because we don't have any. So technically, I'm not even going to really do anything in my life.
Wow.
Yeah, that's a little challenging. So I feel like if we can work on a policy that sort of changes that, gives women more opportunity to even bargain and ask for more stuff, then at least we're more economically empowered to do things on our own.
Have you met with anyone to like discuss that? Like, who set that is it on the national level?
Well, to be very specific, I think that
that's where we probably have like a 20% in parliament women representation. And that of course is because of all the noise that's going on in international space. But when you walk into these rooms, you only see, elderly men 50, 60 up who have this patriarchal, so we're living in a highly patriarchal system, and it's very hard to even have those conversations because they're like, why do you even need to own property? Aren't you just fine marrying a man who's gonna buy it in his name and pass it down to you, or so we're still in that space of I want to own this, I want to have this, I can own this if I have the ability to. And I think it has sort of even affected even the levels of education because we don't go past and I'll use my example. I'm high, I got to doing like a master's program, and for girls in Cameroon, getting to that level is like you're not still gonna get a job either way. So you might as well just dump on your bachelor's, get married, get somebody who's gonna sign documents for you. So it's hard to find people or even go into spaces that people even understand what they're trying to talk about, and they just tell me outright it's not gonna work. You're not gonna go anywhere with this conversation because the people who are in policy making spaces are going to tell you it's not relevant.
That's something that totally should get media attention because my jaw dropped when you said that, as all of you saw. And that's something that a lot of people in the world need to be informed of. Like, that's a women's right. And I can only imagine child marriage and all of these things, and having a child young and teen moms, all of that must be so impacted by the fact that why would there be a reason if you can't own property? So yeah, I totally would recommend reaching out to media because that's shocking, it's abhorrent, and such a obsolete viewpoint. And it's a women's right to own property and do whatever you want. Any other policy ideas before we wrap up? Oh,
For me, it would be might be controversial to some of them, but I am very anti-gun. I don't believe in guns. I never touch one. I don't want to see one, and I wish that we will live in a gun-free world. But in our country, in the United States, it's embedded in our institution. You have the right to own a gun, and depends where I am. If I go into deep redder states, if I say this very bluntly, I might get killed, and I would. That's one thing I promised myself. I would not leave this world with by a gun. Hopefully, it doesn't happen. But when I speak about these topics, people get heated, and they call me names, and they unfriend me, block me, and I don't care, obviously. But I do say it. We have a very high gun violence in this country. Kids want to own guns, and they're all over. So for me, that's appalling. I don't believe that. I'm an educator. I'm a humanitarian, so I'm all pro peace and security. It's SDG 16, I believe, covers that one. So my dilemma and my fear and the thing that I would like to, I guess, persuade and help people think is something kind of like change their thinking and make it more into a more peaceful, inclusive, and less violent kind of world and society. And sort of like, yes, things can be changed. Just because it's written in the Constitution doesn't mean it cannot be abolished. It cannot be destroyed. Words and things can be changed and tweaked and reshape and adjust to the times. But that, for many Americans, is like, whoa, what are you saying? You are undemocratic, you're anti the US, and blah, blah, blah. So it's kind of hard to have these conversations unless I'm having it with an open minded room. So you guys who write policies and lobbying is something that I never thought of it because it sounds daunting and a lot of work. How can you persuade, or what would be some things that, like someone like me who is anti guns, I guess, how can I present these topics in a less confrontational way, more friendly, if that's the right word?
So
what can I do, like to
yeah, one thing for those of you who are
not
not
get
from the
killed and speak?
yeah, those of you who are not from the United States, gun violence is the leading cause of death in young people and in children. It is ravaging our societies, and hate crimes for LGBTQ individuals, racism, Muslim and Jewish religious minorities in the United States. Like, it has so many intersections, and it is our lives. I mean, kids are dying. So I think one thing I would recommend is one, getting involved with Students Demand and Moms Demand. Even though those both sound like two things, moms and students, they're open to anyone, and they spit pure facts. This is our lives. no child should be sitting under the desk in pre-K all the way till college wondering if they're going to get killed. So I would totally recommend doing that and just talking from the heart, like, hey, this is not right. And I saw hand over. Did you raise your hand? Oh, you didn't? Okay. Hand raised. Yeah.
Just adding on to that, I know students in Monkston are under like the realm of every town.
Yeah.
So, and also another one that I am involved with is Sandy but Promise. Yeah, so they're really helpful with that.
And Zuri, are you in California?
Yes.
Yeah, so there's a ton of policies going through the legislature this year. One that's going to have domestic violence restraining orders. 'Cause that's the other thing. Domestic violence is a direct impact of gun violence, and vice versa. So definitely look into the California chapters of Everytown and Gifford's Courage.
Kind of like going with this topic, I strongly believe that police officers should have some sort of social work background, maybe psychology background, something in, relating to human services, because unfortunately, yeah, trauma informed care, because like there's too many people, too many minorities getting killed for just being them. They don't know how to, I'm used to work as a behavior tech. They don't know how to deal with people who have severe mental illnesses, severe intellectual disabilities either. So I feel like they need to learn the different kind of populations and how to work with them, and rather than getting their gun out and shooting them because they don't know how to deal with that situation.
Right. And what if someone has autism or a intellectual disability? I mean, community college is free in California. Police officers should be required to take a few classes. And that's something I would also contact your representative on, because that's a great policy and also something that's not going to cost a lot. Hand back there.
I was just going to add on to that because police officers in the US on average only need to train for 18 to 21 months. But actually, when you look at Norway, they have to train up to 3 years. England and Wales have a requirement that they must have an academic degree, so it's going to put on what you said, that they need some sort of like human resources or psychology understanding to work with people. Another thing that was also coming to mind since we were talking about domestic violence is child marriage. Here in the US, Americans mistakenly think that this is just some sort of foreign issue. It's not. At Soka University, we have quite a number of workshops learning about the harms of child marriage practices here in the US. It's legal in 40 out of the 50 states because there is no national minimum age of law for marriage, and there's no national law in general for minors being married to someone over the age of 21. And one of the most devastating things is, imagine a child, I'm talking someone under the age of 18, in a lot of cases the practices are for someone around the age of 13 here in the US. They can be married to someone who is very violent and abusive to them, but they cannot get divorced because a marriage is a legally binding contract which they cannot break away from until they are the age of 18. And this also goes in tandem with the trafficking issue here in the US, which I feel like is the silent issue. So this is also something, it's like we can think of things at the global, broader level, but also just know that these things are happening here too in our countries, and especially the US. It's very important to work at like the local and the state level, because until each state passes their own forms and their own referendums, we can't have it at the national level. And that's like one of the biggest blights connecting domestic violence, police brutality, gun laws, all of these issues is just, again, with the elections this year, think state, think local, because that is what eventually becomes the national.
That's insane. I didn't know it was 40 out of 50 states. And also, I know California is working towards, there's a law. So if anyone's interested, I highly recommend Googling it and getting involved.
Yeah, my name is David. Zuri, I definitely wanted to add on to what you were saying when it comes to like gun violence in America. So I'm not American, I'm from Canada, and so culture around firearms is very different. I also have an atypical relationship to firearms because I used to be in the Canadian Armed Forces Reserves, which is a very rare situation. Only about 1% of the population of Canada has like any involvement in the military. So one thing that I think of regarding like the United States is like practically you're probably never going to get rid of firearms in America because there's so many and because there's such a large like economy around weapons manufacturing and a culture of it. So I am very interested in it because I definitely agree that it's like probably like the #2 leading issue in the United States. And I think one thing that you would be interested to explore is how like a new program could be developed, which is a mandatory educational program of how to basically use firearms for everybody. So Switzerland, for example, they have had like a long history of neutrality, and they also have a citizens militia where like military service is compulsory, and people basically are an army reservist, which is like a paid program, all while being between the ages of like 18 to 22, while people are usually going to post-secondary education. And they have, I think, the second highest number of guns per capita after the US, but they have one of the lowest amount of like recorded instances of gun violence out of any country in the world. So I think that changing the narrative between being pro-gun or anti-gun, which is like not really going to go anywhere, to being like, how do we live with the reality of firearms being prevalent in America, that would be a really interesting way to see whether that actually catches like water or not.
Yeah, thank you.
That gave me another idea, which is also like background checks. So mental health is a major component. A lot of people who die by suicide, it is by firearm. And those who commit mass shootings oftentimes have a problematic mental health history where they aren't receiving treatment. So that's one thing like in California that they're working towards is if you have a history of mental health issues, you should not own a gun. Or you should wait a certain period. So that's one other thing I would highly recommend looking into. We are almost up, but thank you all for bringing yourself, your ideas, your passion, drive, intellect, and ambition. Here's my Instagram. I can also give out my email. If anyone has any questions on policy or any of the things I mentioned, let me know. This is my passion, and I loved hearing all of your ideas. Thank you guys all so much.
All right, everyone, in like 5 minutes, we'll be starting to our new workshop. You will probably be interested in it. Voice have meaning, but when we advertise it or do films about it, then it becomes more meaningful. So our next workshop will be about filmmaking. Oh, wow.